Alors, on va terminer cette soirée avec le lancement d'un ouvrage qui a été publié par l'UMA à la suite de conférences qui avaient été organisées à Bogota. Ce livre, Gótico Provençal, qui a été édité par Simon Castets et Fabien Gröning. Et ce soir, donc, on aura la chance d'avoir Simon qui nous présentera le livre ainsi que 3 des autres contributeurs IS. Voilà, pendant une trentaine de minutes. Vous serez invité à la suite, si vous le souhaitez, à aller au lancement à la terrasse des Forges, mais on vous rappellera où ce sera. Simon.
Merci. Bonsoir à tous et toutes. Je suis très heureux d'être ici en si bonne compagnie pour vous présenter le livre SPF 666 Gótico Provençal, une nouvelle publication LUMA et une sorte de mutinerie poétique contre les représentations provençales. Afin de privilégier la fluidité de la conversation entre nos invités ce soir, la conversation se fera en anglais. Je vous remercie de votre compréhension et vous invite à vous saisir des oreillettes si nécessaire qui sont à votre disposition. Thank you very much, Martin and Salma, for including SPF 666 as part of this extraordinary program. Thank you, Vasilis, for taking part in the book. Thank you to the entire team of LUMA for making all this look much easier than it is. And all of that in keeping with the trailblazing vision behind LUMA, which allows for seemingly random projects, such as Gótico Provençal, allows for seemingly random projects stemming from conversations with artists to blossom into intellectually stimulating cultural objects, whether material or not, for a wide public to enjoy. I want to express a particular word of gratitude to the co-editor of this book, Fabien Gröning, for his outstanding and most thoughtful work on the project. So, Provence is populated by alchemists, wizards, and witches who keep magical customs alive. It is haunted by a fantastic bestiary of dragons, monsters, and werewolves. The Camargue is a swampy place that refuses to be tamed, and where gardens tend to dissolve into wilderness as far as the eye can see. Etymologically and historically, the term Gothic derives from the Goths, a Germanic people who populated large parts of Europe from the 3rd to the 8th century. Succeeding medieval Gothic art and architecture, the Gothic as a literary genre is rooted in 18th century Romanticism. At the time, the term Gothic referred to anything obsolete, old-fashioned, or outlandish. The Gothic genre expanded significantly in the 19th century and transitioned into film and popular culture in the course of the 20th, spreading far beyond Europe. The Gothic has the capacity to adapt and incorporate vernacular traditions and legends. This distinctly porous nature contributes to its unexpected presence around the globe, upending social, cultural, and political assumptions. In the case of tropical Gothic, it manages to turn primitivism on its head. Gótico Provençal is brought to life with this book as a new subgenre of tropical Gothic. The expression was coined by Filipino writer Nick Joaquin for the title of a collection of short stories. His book, Tropical Gothic, from 1972, draws upon Spanish cultural legacies, the violence of imperialism, and the deliberate destruction and loss of indigenous cultural forms in the Philippines. This leads me to warmly welcoming today's participants, who are among the 22 contributors to the book, which includes many artists whose work was shown here in Arles, such as Julien Crozet, Sky Hopinka, Gary Indiana, and Precious Okoyomon. First, I'm delighted to welcome Diana Campbell, a curator who has been working in South and Southeast Asia since 2010, primarily in India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. Since 2013, she has been the artistic director of the Samdani Art Foundation in Bangladesh and the chief curator of the Dhaka Art Summit, which is the world's most visited contemporary art festival. Next year, the Samdani Art Center and Sculpture Park, the first permanent home of the foundation, will open in Sylhet in northeastern Bangladesh. From 2016 to 18, Campbell is also the founding artistic director of Belas Artes Projects in the Philippines, and she currently also serves as head of global initiatives at the Hartwig Foundation in Amsterdam. Thank you, Diana, for making your way to Arles and your participation in SPF 666. It is an immense pleasure to also be welcoming Pierre-Alexandre Mateos and Charles Teyssou, a tremendously talented duo of curators based in Paris. Their current projects include Paris Orbital, a public program at the Pinot Collection on the links between Parisian mythologies and pulp culture, and a publication on cruising with Spectre Books and Head. They are also organizing Art Basel's Conversation at Paris Plus, and in June they will inaugurate the very first edition of Stavanger Secession, a curatorial festival in Norway. Among their many inquiries into the underbelly of culturally significant locales, one stands out particularly today, and this is the research that they conducted while here in residency at LUMA Arles, starting in 2010. The project is called Arles, in 2017, sorry. The project is called Arles Terminal City, and it posits the Rhône as a twin of Walter Benjamin's Mississippi. And the research has been a key reference and inspiration for SPF 666. It lives on as a website, arlesterminalcity.com. We will first hear from Diana, but first and foremost, please join me in giving our speakers a very warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and thank you so much to everyone at the LUMA Foundation for this opportunity, as Patrick so beautifully mentioned, to be able to imagine together and to imagine, fictions that could lead to a more beautiful future. Could we please go towards the ends of the slides? So we're going through some texts. My text for the book is called Bruises and Backwards Feet. And Simone was talking about werewolves and witches and these kind of figures that are here in the Camargue. And I started writing about similar creatures that exist in contexts that I'm familiar to, which would be the Pacific, Southeast Asia, and how these entities actually can serve as protectors between humans and the environment. It's kind of, in the text I also talk about Mickey Mouse. He could be a mythical creature, but actually he's real because people believe in him and make choices around him. So similarly, there are mythical creatures that exist in places, so for example, this is an image of Brazil, where perhaps the story of Adam's fall from the garden arrived forcibly by colonial forces and tried to erase other stories. But these stories still exist in indigenous cultures, and there are artists that are conjuring them through contemporary art. So this is an image by an artist named Lucas Arruda, and he is from Brazil. And these jungle paintings, which many of you might be familiar with, are conjuring a creature called the Curupira. So the Curupira is a mythical creature. It's described in many different ways. Usually it's a boy. He has flaming, fiery red hair, but he serves, if you try to come into the jungle and take things out, he's going to come and confuse you. And how does he confuse you? He has backwards feet. So when he walks in, if you're trying to follow his footsteps to get out of the jungle, you're actually going to get led further and further and further in, get lost, and be kind of subsumed into the jungle environment, maybe become fodder for future trees to grow. So Lucas, it's rare that he includes texts in his work, but there are two works where he does conjure the Curupira with texts. But he's also interested in that there are real remedies that exist to try to protect you from these fictional characters. So if you put a cross in the middle of the jungle with two sticks, it can perhaps ward off the Curupira. And when thinking about these backwards feet, I started thinking about antipodes. So I'm very interested in, what would happen if you were to dig through that jungle and come out the other side. Next slide, please. This is another image. Next slide. So here if you come out the other side of Brazil, you end up in Guam, which is a tiny island, but massive in impact, where my family comes from. So Guam is near the Philippines. It's near Japan. But it is one of the 17 places still defined as a colony by the UN, and it's actually a colony of the United States. So my great-grandmother was a subject of Spain, Japan, and the United States without ever moving. And when Patrick started talking about, in European philosophy, about the switch between roots being in the sky or roots being in the ground, and what that meant relative to ancestors, in our culture, our ancestors still live with us in roots where we are. And so there's a creature that, I learned about, or creatures, ever since I was a kid, and the creatures are called Tautaumona. And Tautaumona live in the jungle, and they're our ancestors. And the way in our culture, there's circular time. So they're actually ahead of us because they came before us, and they're still there. And you actually have to ask permission to go into the jungle if you want to go there. And it's considered a real thing. And they say that if you go into the jungle without permission, you'll find bruises around yourself. They don't hurt, but you're kind of marked with that sign of your ancestors telling you that this is a place you're not supposed to go, or that you're going in there and you're taking from there. This also means we don't have gardens in Guam like that. Gardens, when I think about gardens, I think about extraction, or European gardens, right? You're trimming things away, you're taking things away. Jungles are additive. It's a different sort of system. So this is an image by a Chamorro diaspora artist who lives in Los Angeles named Mickey Davis, and it's called Tautaumona's Path. And what you're seeing here is, so what's interesting in a lot of these cultures, including Brazilian culture, Colombian culture, Chamorro culture, there is traces of, or there's Spanish colonization, but there's syncretism. So parts of old religion still remain alive. So Catholicism in Guam, for example, carries animist traces as a way to keep them alive. So here, this textile that you're seeing is an altar. It was an altar cover that her grandmother used in Catholic ceremonies, but she laid this out in a kind of trail that's leading to the jungle, and did a performance also wearing her grandmother's dress. And what you're seeing here in the photograph is the child won't go on this path. And that's very interesting because in this culture, Tautaumona like to eat children, and we'll get to that later in another Filipino mythical figure that exists in life. So traces of that performance became an installation. So this is called Maile, and it's an image. You see the altar cloth that's been worn away by time, by the weather, by humidity. Her grandmother's dress, and a mirror is behind the cloth, so you can see yourself in this scene of being able to see your ancestors, see the future, feel the past, all in one image. Next slide, please. Shifting over to Bangladesh, which is a place where I work and I'm close to, there is a mythical figure named Bon Bibi, who is, what's very interesting about Bon Bibi is she's a goddess that exists in both Hindu and Muslim and animist cultures. That's that figure, again, that's protecting that line of greed about extracting things from the jungle versus protecting what's there. And Salman Toor and Amitav Ghosh imagined this story, which is told in rhyming couplets. So everyone rhymes, you remember them. And they weren't made as text to be read in a book, but rather verses to be performed together, which really was this allegory of living with nature, being part of nature. But they imagined it into a beautiful book that's called Jungle Nama. I highly suggest buying it. But here in the Dhaka Art Summit, we turned it into an installation with a Paris-based design firm called Golem. And I'm going like this because you could turn the pages of this book as an installation and find yourself within this scene. Next slide, please. So here you see also details of, this. So if you need help in the jungle because you see someone trying to extract or do something evil, you can call on the creature of Bon Bibi and she will come to save you. Next slide. You spoke about werewolves. We here have were-tigers. So were-tigers are a figure that exists both in South and Southeast Asia, but this idea that humans are living, or were-tigers are living among humans, so you never know if someone is a human or a were-tiger. But Ho Tzu Nayen, who is a fantastic Singaporean artist, created this series called One or Several Tigers, where he was looking at the resistance that were-tigers could have against colonial forces. So for example, when the British were trying to survey in Malaya, someone turned into a were-tiger and broke the measuring device, because again, measuring in the jungle or in these kinds of capacities were forms of extraction. You were mapping. Mapping was not necessarily a good thing. Next slide. Here's another image. Next slide. In the same kind of region, also in a region where were-tigers exist, there's a frightening creature called a manananggal. which is a sort of vampire that also loves children. So if you come out into the jungle at night, you might see a person, and it might seem like maybe it could be someone you know. They seem like a real person, but at night their body will separate. And a tongue will come out, and they apparently, or this creature will suck the fetus out of a pregnant woman's belly. And Amy Lian and Enjo Camacho, they imagined a whole series about this. And the first time, I hope the only time in my life that I saw an art exhibition be censored by the Catholic Church was when Amy and Enzo tried to do a presentation about this in the Philippines, and the Catholic Church there didn't want to reascribe that aswangs and manananggals really existed. And in that same capacity, the United States would also add fang marks sometimes when they were killing like communist insurgents in the jungle, so that they would think that aswangs and manananggals were there. So this is kind of a jump across space and time, but with these figures that are mythical, but they have this line that's trying to protect humans and nature, and to keep the jungle there and keep it from being turned into a garden. So with that, I'll pass it to you guys.
So thank you, Simon, for the invitation, and Martin as well, and the LUMA team for making this event possible. So Pierre and I will speak about the research that we conducted in 2018-2019 while a resident at the LUMA Foundation. Originally, we were invited by Monsieur Richobris to do a survey of south of France, its artists, architects, scientists, and really early on, while we were there, we kind of tweaked the original assignment, and we thought that it would be interesting, in fact, to import the Southern Gothic genre from the Bayou, from the Louisiane, to Camargue, from one wetland to another. So first, Southern Gothic could be defined as a literary genre that tries to deal with the social tension, racial, political, economical tension in the south of the United States through specific literary genres, which are like gritty realism, horror, the marvelous, detective novel. And why importing this genre in the Camargue, in Arles, and the Rhône du Delta? Well, there were two main evidence. The first one was the existence of 5 necropolis in medieval times in Arles. So Arles was like a kind of Manhattan for the dead. And so that was really, that's a striking example. And so the talk we're gonna give you will go through the website that we did at the end of our residencies that gather our research. And that first took the shape of a map. I'm not sure, yeah. So that we did while we were here. So the first sign was the necropolis, and then the second sign that led us to the Gothic dimension of the region was the fact that when William Burroughs cut his finger, which led him not into the CIA because he wanted to be a spy agent, but they deemed that he was too crazy. So he cut his finger, in fact, because he wanted to offer him as a present to his escort. And so after, in interviews, he said that was a Van Gogh kick. And so there was a direct, connection between the ears of Van Gogh and the fingers of Burroughs. And that with the necropolis was too beautiful not to dig. And then we started to gather evidence of that, avant-garde, fact, mythologies, stories that happened in the South. And so in this map, really quickly, we highlighted, for example, Claude Parent, so the architect, the engineer of behind the nuclear power plant that are in the north of the Rhône. At the very top, you have the Villa de Yati of Marie Shelley, so inverted Pompeii of the Rhône Delta. We thought that her fiction was going through the Rhône and kind of sedimented in the Camargue. Then we have Pierre Boulle, the apes, the world of apes, the planet of apes. The experimentation of Walter Benjamin with hashish in Marseille, Brave New World, Atlas Iota, Saint-Nary-sur-Mer. Super Can of J.J. Ballard in Cannes, inspired by Sophia Antipolis. Many stories that put together was designing a web of Gothic stories and disturbing the solar, nostalgic, almost archaic vision of the south of France. So I'm going to read a little introduction that we did for this research. Our research for the LUMA Foundation in Arles started on Rue de la Liberté, in an apartment connecting a tropical greenhouse to a toy shop. 6 months is the time we were allocated to meet artists, thinkers, filmmakers, and architects linked to the south of France. We could choose our outfit: entomologist, clerk, explorer, headhunter, seismologist. It is with this methodology in mind that we began our quest: ceaselessly excavate, choose, remove, rework, survey, and hybridize diffuse and contradictory elements to arrive at the new composite portrait of one of the largest communes in France. For a long time, Arles was the equivalent of Manhattan for the dead. During antiquity, its 5 necropolis spread out in the outskirts of the town became so full that rumors made the Rhone River into an autoroute by which corpses were brought into town. The Aliscans are now the only remains of this metropolis tirelessly devoted to bodies with no fatigue. For us, these constituted the first in a series of clues leading us to the same conclusion. Arles is a Gothic town par excellence. At the epicenter of experiment on living beings, petrochemical industries, and underground networks, it represents the macabre ground innerving the delta found by Marseille, Montpellier, Lyon triangle. But this reality was long eclipsed by the patrimonial vision maintained by tour operators who were avid for consensus. It took us 6 months of winter inquiry to perceive the face of Mr. Hyde behind the tray of Dr. Jekyll. 6 months for this territory that seemed to us allergic to notion of darkness or metamorphosis to reveal itself as obsessed with both, to the point of nurturing a terminal dependence on the idea of mutation. The delta transformed the dead into a living being. What is natural into synthetics lies into truth, and the sane into the delirious. During our research, our apartment became a dissecting table, greeting each document, each image, like the most sensitive of proofs, and soon to wallpaper all the walls, fragments of unmentionable manifestos.
Hi, thank you, Charles. Among our research, I wanted to bring to the fore, we extracted 3 novels. We wrote 3 novels that you can see behind. So Delta Intoxication, Necropolis, another one called Paranoid Park, and that you can read on the art publication, Art Magazine. That's also on the website, artterminalcity.com. I don't have time to describe exactly this novel, but let's say it's based on a multiple narrative we found during our research. Too much pages. So can we go next slides? Yes. Among our research, I wanted today to bring to the fore three figures that are at the crossroads of history of garden, or maybe anti-garden, and Southern Gothic. The first one is a mathematician called Alexander Grothendieck. Alexander Grothendieck is maybe recognized as the major figure of mathematics in the 20th century, and he spent the majority of his life in a remote place in the Pyrenees. He was also teacher in Montpellier. He died recently in 2018 in a pure loneliness in Saint-Géron Hospital. He was considered as a sort of enfant terrible of mathematics and always placed himself at the bank of scientific community. And for the last 2 decades of his life, he's taking refuge in La Serre, probably one of the most remote places in France, a small village in the Pyrenees, where he finished his life as an hermit. So the key point of interest for us, and what we find extremely Gothic about Alexander Grothendieck, was his collection of drawings, his formula. At the end of his life, his son gave to the city of Montpellier and the Mathematical Research Center 28,000 drawings, 28,000 base of research. Mostly, we love to read them as a pure artifact and artistic format. We're a pure neophyte in mathematics, so I will say for the common mortal, it's remain unreadable. And I love to describe the drawing. So you have that's Alexander Grothendieck at the end of his life. So a sort of sans job, a little bit. And you have one of the drawings, extremely abstract. I love to qualify them as esoteric, occult, cosmologic, Gothic, vitalist, but also pessimistic. To understand a bit more, Grothendieck, we need to know he was also extremely politicized person. He was an activist during the 70s, anti-nuclear, anti-military, anti-border, anti a lot of stuff, actually. And he was linked to so behind, maybe the next slide, sorry. You have, before. Thank you. Survivre was a publication, so if you're a bit bibliophile or into counterculture from the 70s, and into really rare lefty publication, a bit premonitory of TAZ, temporary zone of autonomous, you will find interest, I think, in the Survivre with this publication. So it was behind one of the founder of this, so anti-nuclear, anti-military, anti-border, and deep ecologist publication. And at the end of his life, so in La Serre, he was an hermit, as I said, and he had a sort of garden that I love to qualify as a garden of retirement. I love to think about a garden of priest with all the humility that implies the idea of a garden of priest. He said for him this nature, this protecting nature, when he didn't have any contact with the rest of the population, was a way to concentrate himself to introspection and to metaphysics, metaphysics of mathematics. So that's the first garden. I don't have picture of the garden because it was not a garden, actually. It was like the wild nature, a bit like Henri Thoreau of Pyrenees. My second example of anti-garden is Jean-Henri Fabre. I will be really fast. He's an entomologist, probably like the main entomologist of the 20th century. He had a house in Sérignan, and he created a garden dedicated to insects. He loved to say this garden was dedicated to the Republic of Bees, to the massacres of ladybugs, to the saraband of lullabies, and other beautiful insects. Sorry. He is the author of Sumir Entomologist. Strangely, he's extremely famous in Japan because Japan has a strong culture in matter of entomology and a strong respect for insects. And you can visit the garden in Sérignan, which is now a museum dedicated to, called Armas, dedicated to Jean-Henri Fabre. Another interesting aspect about Jean-Henri Fabre, he was a close friend with Stéphane Mallarmé. He was also a poet linked to Félibrige. And he also had a correspondence with Roger Caillois when he loved to describe the life of insects as a perverse lifestyle. And among this description of the perverse lifestyle of insects, he has a novel depicting the sexual parade of the royal mantis. Another one, the tragic end of a coleopter addict to ether. Or another one about an eccentric princess who loved more insects than butterflies. And this princess, in particular, was the main inspiration for Miyazaki, Nausicaa, the princess of insects. So another link between south of France and Japan. This time, really briefly, I wanted to talk about Georges Bataille and Van Gogh and the sacrifice, but let's go. But I jump on my last example, Rose Lauder. Rose Lauder, extremely interesting artist figure based in Avignon. So experimental director, was a founder of the Experimental Cinematheque of Avignon. She was a close friend of Stan Brakhage. She invented the notion of Gothic materialism, and she made 55 movies dedicated to garden and the deconstruction of still life, landscape. Extremely classical base, I will say, but with modernist tools of lecture. She insists a lot about the pictoriality, about the vibration. I love to think about her about the sort of Stan Brakhage of Avignon. And to conclude, She made like a movie about Camargue and the desert salt of Camargue that inspired us this line. Sorry. The Camargue is a wetland that can look like the end of the world, a land of fever where brackish water crystallizes, protected by a convention by the name of Ramsar, a town in Caspian Sea known for exiling radioactivity from its granitic rock. It is also a place of passage of an LC junction where silts deposit and the genetic information of thousands of birds scatters. It is in this interzone surrounded by fuming citadel that a wandering fauna mingles and mixes. And yes, I will show you as a conclusion a short movie by Rose Lauder that will qualify as a Gothic deconstructive garden. Yes, and we can maybe put play. Okay, not moving image. You can find Rose Lauder on YouTube or on artterminalcity.com. Thank you so much for your attention.
Just, we're out of time, but I just like to circle back to another swampy area, just very briefly, because Diana, you are in the process of building not a garden, but something very different from a garden. Insilet, the first permanent home for the Samdani Art Foundation. So could you tell us a little bit, very briefly, about that project, looking to the future, and how you're engaging artists in designing a new form of relationship to the natural environment?
Thank you, Simone. So it's also been such a pleasure that Simone has been able to visit and kind of see this project grow over time. So to call Bangladesh a wetland would be an understatement. So most people associate Bangladesh with intense flooding, which is the case. But it's interesting that in Bangladesh, people name girls Flood. Like, so there's a word bonna, that's quite a common name that is given to young, or to girls who become women, or whatever they want to be. But it's, it means that flood doesn't only mean disaster. It can mean lots of things. So flood is also part of the agricultural cycle. Odubong Nkanga was with us and was talking to researchers about how architecture was made for floods. And so people would always ask me, how are you going to maintain this site we're actually near the wettest place in the world? And it was actually, how do we work with artists to embrace rain, to embrace water, to embrace sun, but rather than try to tame the environment to something that it's not, to work with it. And so to also look at how we can be, so something that really moves me about Bangladesh is, and I think similar to the spirit of the LUMA ateliers, is how do you find solutions rather than be in this defeatist environment. So you have architects in Bangladesh designing movable homes that cost $500 that can move in when things flood and allow for lives to continue in higher ground. You have floating farms being developed where people can actually feed themselves in these situations of disaster. So we are not in a disaster zone, I hope, but we are working with artists, with architects, with farmers, with communities, because Bangladesh has a lot of people. So it's also this thought, can we turn maintenance into a celebration or into something that's part of the process, rather than become defeatist that we can't maintain this in this wetland. So we're celebrating being in a wetland and also collaborating with others and other institutions around the world where we can learn from each other with how we create in these beautiful yet challenged environments.
Thank you very much, all of you.